Tonight, let your mind do whatever it wants to do. If it races, let it race. If it circles back to something, someone said this afternoon, let it circle. If it picks up a worry you thought you had set down hours ago and turns it over and over the way a hand turns a smooth stone, let it. You do not need to quiet anything. You do not need to fix anything. You are simply here, lying down, breathing, and that is already enough. This is a place for rest, not the kind of rest that demands effort, not the kind where you have to breathe a certain way, or think a certain thought, or clear your mind like an empty room. Just the ordinary rest of someone who has done enough for one day. The kind where your body remembers what your mind keeps forgetting, that you are allowed to stop. That stopping is not laziness. That stillness is not something you earn. It is something you return to, the way water returns to being still, when you stop stirring it. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. There is something quietly beautiful about knowing that right now, in this moment, someone is lying down in Tokyo, and someone else is settling in somewhere in Oslo, and someone is curled up on a couch in Sao Paulo, with the window cracked open to the night air, and none of you have to do anything except be here. You are not alone in this, you never were. Tonight, we will wander through a handful of stories drawn from the Buddhist tradition, teachings that have been whispered at bedsides and told beside rivers and passed from teacher to student for over 2,500 years. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what these stories offer. You do not need to remember any of them. They are not lessons. They are not instructions. They are not tests you will be graded on in the morning. They are simply offerings, the way someone might leave a glass of water on your nightstand. You can drink it, or you can let it sit there. Either way, it was left with kindness. These are not rules to follow or principles to memorize. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to do. If you fall asleep in the middle of a sentence, that is not failure. That is the whole point. These stories were made to be slept on. They do their best work when you are not paying attention. If this path of quiet stories calls to something in you, you are welcome to subscribe and return to this space whenever you need a slower night. We will always be here with another story, another teaching, another long and unhurried evening. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy. Take a slow, deep breath, not a special breath, just the one your body has been waiting to take all day. Feel the weight of yourself against whatever is holding you. And let us begin our journey together. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. The Buddha once made a very gentle observation about the human mind. He said that the mind, by its nature, moves. It jumps from thought to thought, the way a monkey jumps from branch to branch. Not because something is wrong with it, not because it is broken or untrained or failing at some task, but because that is simply what it does. Moving is the mind's nature. The way shining is the sun's nature. The way flowing is a river's nature. And what he suggested, very quietly, with a kind of patience, that only someone who has watched his own mind for a very long time can have, was that you do not need to catch the monkey. You do not need to pin it down. You do not need to build a cage or set a trap or exhaust it into stillness. You only need to sit beneath the tree and watch it swing. And after a while, not because you forced it, but because watching is itself a kind of quiet, the monkey slows on its own. Not stops, slows. And in the slowing there is rest. Tonight we will sit beneath that tree together, in a village where the hills came down so close to the sea that you could smell salt in the morning fog and hear the waves from the doorstep of every house. There lived a man who repaired fishing nets. He had done this work since he was a boy, sitting cross-legged on the stone pier, with a wooden needle in his hand, threading and knotting and pulling tight. His fingers knew the work so well that they moved without instruction, the way a bird builds a nest without ever being taught, the way water finds its way downhill without a map, the way your lungs breathe without being told. The pier was old. The stones were smooth from generations of bare feet, worn into shallow curves where toes had gripped on wet mornings. In the early hours, before the boats went out, the water beneath was so still it looked like dark glass, and you could see the shadows of fish drifting underneath, unhurried, going nowhere in particular. The air smelled of brine and tar, and the particular warm scent of rope that has been soaked and dried 100 times. Seabirds sat on the posts at the end of the pier, facing the wind, perfectly still, as if they had decided that this morning, at least, they would not fly. He was good at his work. Everyone said so. The fishermen trusted him because his knots held, even in rough water, even when the current twisted the nets sideways, and the weight of a full catch pulled at every thread. His patches lasted longer than anyone else's. His hands moved with a sureness that came not from thinking, but from years, decades, of doing the same thing, until the doing and the knowing became one thing indistinguishable, like a river and its bed. But there was one thing about this man that no one understood, and that he himself could not explain. He could not sleep. Not in the way of someone who lies awake with a fever or a toothache. His body was tired. His body wanted rest. His shoulders ached from the day. His eyes felt heavy. Everything about him was ready for sleep, except the one part that mattered most. His mind would not stop moving. It replayed conversations from the morning. It rehearsed conversations for tomorrow. It counted the nets he still had to finish. It wondered whether the knot he tied at noon was tight enough, whether the thread he used for the large net was the right weight, whether the fisherman who brought the torn seine had been disappointed in the work, whether the price he quoted was too high or not high enough. It circled and circled and circled, like a dog trying to find the right spot to lie down, turning and turning on the same patch of ground, and never finding it. His wife had stopped asking him what was wrong. In the early years, she would reach for him in the dark and say, "What are you thinking about?" And he would say, "Nothing," and they both knew it was not nothing. It was everything, everything at once, everything on top of everything, a pile of thoughts so tangled that he could not find the beginning of any single one. One evening after a long day of mending, his hands sore, his back stiff, his eyes tired from squinting at thread in the fading light, he walked up the hill behind the village to a small monastery he had passed 1,000 times but never entered. The gate was wooden and old, and it hung slightly open, the way gates do in places where no one is afraid of what might come in. He did not know why he went. He was not looking for religion or for answers. He was not even looking for advice. He was just tired of being tired. And the monastery was the only place he had not tried. Inside the gate, he found an old woman sweeping the courtyard. She was not a nun. She wore no robes. Her clothes were plain and patched at the elbows. Her hair was white and tied back with a piece of cloth. She was simply someone who came each evening to sweep, the way some people water a garden that is not theirs, the way some people feed birds they will never hold. The courtyard was made of flat stones, and the broom moved across them in long, even strokes, and the sound, a soft, rhythmic shushing, was the most peaceful thing he had heard in months. He stood there for a moment, not sure what to say. She did not look up. She did not seem surprised that he was there. She just swept. "I cannot sleep," he finally told her. His voice sounded strange in the quiet courtyard. Too loud, too full of something he could not name. "My mind will not be still." She kept sweeping. The broom moved, the dust moved. The evening light came in over the wall, at a low angle, turning the stones gold. "Tell me," she said without looking up, "when you mend a net, do you chase every thread at once?" He blinked. "No," he said. "Of course not. I follow one thread at a time." "And the other threads, where do they go while you are following the one?" He thought about this. It was not a question anyone had ever asked him. "They stay where they are," he said slowly. "They wait. Do you worry about them while you are working on the one?" "No," he almost smiled. "They are just threads." She stopped sweeping and looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark and kind and slightly amused, the way the eyes of someone who has heard a great many people say the same thing are kind, not because the thing is funny, but because it is so human, so universals, reliably the same. "Your thoughts are just threads," she said. "You do not need to follow all of them tonight. You do not need to follow any of them. They will still be there in the morning, waiting for you, exactly where you left them. They always are." He opened his mouth to argue, to say that thoughts are not threads, that threads do not keep you awake, that threads do not whisper and nag and circle and follow you up a hill to a monastery you never planned to visit. But something in the way she returned to her sweeping stopped him. The broom moved across the stone in long, unhurried strokes. She was not trying to get the courtyard perfectly clean. She was not racing to finish before dark. She was just sweeping, and there was a kind of quiet in the motion that he recognized from somewhere very old inside himself. The quiet of hands that know what they are doing and have stopped asking why. The quiet that lived in his own fingers when he was mending and the world fell away. And there was nothing but the thread and the needle and the slow, patient work of making something whole again. He watched her sweep for a long time. He did not know how long. The light changed. The shadows lengthened. A bird landed on the wall and sat there, watching both of them, with the calm disinterest of something that has never had a thought it needed to chase. He walked home that night along the path that wound between pine trees and rocky outcrops, and the air smelled of resin and salt, and the particular coolness that comes when the sun has been gone just long enough for the stones to start releasing the warmth they stored during the day. The thoughts were still there. They had not gone anywhere, but for the first time in a long while, he noticed the space between them, the small, warm gaps where nothing was happening at all, where no thread needed following, where his mind was simply quiet the way the courtyard had been quiet, not empty, but resting. And in those gaps, something in his chest loosened, the way a fist unclenches when you forget you were making one, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling from both ends. You know this feeling. You know what it is like to lie in the dark with a mind that will not stop sorting through the day, pulling out conversations like old receipts, examining them, folding them, putting them back, pulling them out again, checking the lock you already checked, rewriting the email you already sent, rehearsing the apology you may or may not owe someone. And perhaps tonight, hearing this, you can let the threads stay where they are, not because you have solved anything, not because the thoughts have stopped, but because they are just threads. They are not emergencies. They are not deadlines. They are just threads, and you are the one holding the needle. And you can set it down. The net will still be there in the morning. It always is. An old Zen teacher once said, "The mind is not a room to be emptied. It is a sky. Clouds pass through it." That is what skies do. And what he did not say, because it did not need saying, is that the sky is never damaged by the clouds. The sky does not worry about the clouds. The sky does not chase the clouds, or try to hold them in place, or wonder why they came. It simply lets them pass, and after they pass, it is still the sky, wide and open, and exactly what it was before the clouds arrived. There was a woman in another village, a village farther north, where the winters came early and stayed late, and the trees lost their leaves before anyone was ready, standing bare and surprised against the grey sky like people who had been caught in the middle of undressing, who understood this differently. She was a baker. She woke each morning at 3, long before the sun had any intention of rising, and worked in a kitchen so warm that the windows fogged and you could not see the street outside. The air smelled of yeast and flour and the particular sweetness of bread that is almost ready but not quite. That moment when the dough has surrendered to the heat and the crust is forming and the whole room fills with a warmth that is not just temperature but something closer to kindness. She had baked for 30 years. Her hands were thick and strong, the knuckles swollen slightly, the fingers squared off at the tips from decades of pressing and folding and shaping. She could tell by the weight of dough in her palm whether it needed more water, not by a recipe, not by a measurement, but by the way it sat in her hand, the way it spoke to her skin. She could tell by the sound of a loaf when she knocked on its crust whether the inside was done. A hollow sound meant ready. A dense sound meant wait. Her body was a library of small, accumulated knowings, the kind that cannot be written down, because they live in the fingers and the wrists and the soles of the feet, in the place where memory and muscle become one thing. But she had a habit that her apprentice found strange. Every morning before she began, before she measured the flour or tested the yeast or lit the second oven, she would stand at the counter for a full minute and do nothing. She did not pray. She did not close her eyes. She did not take deep breaths or recite anything. She simply stood there with her hands flat on the wooden surface and waited, the way you wait for a bus you know is coming but cannot see yet. One morning, her apprentice, a young woman with quick hands and an impatient mind, asked her about it. "What are you doing when you stand there? You look like you are listening to something." The baker smiled. It was the smile of someone who has been asked a question she has been waiting a long time to answer. "I am letting the night finish," she said. "What do you mean?" "When I wake up," the baker said, still smiling, "the mind is still going. It is still dreaming, still worrying, still finishing arguments from yesterday, still making lists for tomorrow. If I start working right away, if I put my hands in the dough while my mind is still in bed, still tangled in whatever I was dreaming, I carry all of that into the bread. And bread knows. Bread remembers the hands that made it. Bread made by anxious hands tastes different from bread made by calm hands. Not worse exactly, but different. And I want my bread to taste like this morning, not like last night." The apprentice looked skeptical. She was young enough to believe that efficiency was the same as quality, that moving fast was the same as moving well. "So you just stand there." "I just stand here. I feel the counter under my hands. I notice the temperature of the wood. I listen to the oven ticking as it heats. And after a minute, Sometimes, too, the night finishes on its own. The thoughts run out of momentum, the way a top runs out of spin, not because I pushed them away, not because I fought them, because I stopped feeding them. I stopped giving them something to push against. And then my hands are ready, and then the bread begins. She went back to kneading, pressing the dough with the heels of her palms in a rhythm that was so steady and so unhurried. It could have been a heartbeat, not the fast heartbeat of someone running, but the slow heartbeat of someone sleeping. The apprentice watched her and noticed something she had not noticed before. How calm the baker's face was. Not blank, not empty calm, not the calm of someone who has no problems. The calm of someone who has decided, very quietly, without announcement or ceremony, that the problems can wait until the bread is done, and the bread right now needed her full attention. And her full attention was a gift she gave it freely, without resentment, the way you give attention to someone you love. Pema Chödrön once wrote, "You are the sky, everything else, it is just weather." Tonight you are the sky, the thoughts that are passing through you right now. The worries, the plans, the fragments of conversation, the low hum of things left undone, they are weather. They will pass, they always pass, not because you chase them away, but because that is the nature of weather. It moves through, and what remains when the weather has passed is what was always there, the wide, patient, undamaged sky of your own awareness, stretching out in every direction, having nothing to prove, needing nothing to be complete. There is a story told in many traditions, in many languages, across many centuries, that goes something like this. A traveler walked a long road through mountains. The road was steep, and the stones were loose, and the wind blew against him the entire way, as if the mountain itself did not want him to arrive. After many hours, he came to a river he could not cross. The water was fast and cold and white with foam, and the rocks beneath the surface were slick and unpredictable. He stood on the bank and watched it for a long time, trying to see the bottom, trying to judge the current, trying to calculate the risk, trying to plan, the way we always try to plan when we are afraid. A child sat nearby on a flat rock, dangling bare feet over the edge, toes almost touching the water. The child was not worried. The child was not planning. The child was watching the water, the way children watch things, with complete attention and no agenda. "How do I cross?" the traveler asked. The child looked at him, not with wisdom. Children do not have wisdom. With something simpler, clarity, the kind of clarity that comes before you learn to complicate things. "You are already wet," the child said. "You have been standing in the rain for an hour." And the traveler looked down and realized the child was right. His clothes were soaked through. His shoes were full of water. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He had been so busy worrying about the river, about what might happen if he tried to cross, that he had not noticed the rain falling on him the entire time. The thing he feared, getting wet, being submerged, losing his footing, had already happened. Slowly, gradually, without drama, the way most of the things we fear actually happen. And he was still standing. His feet were still on solid ground. His lungs were still breathing. And once he noticed, he laughed, not because it was funny, but because the thing he had been afraid of had already happened, and he had survived it. And the surviving had happened without him even noticing. Sometimes the mind races because it believes it is protecting you from something that has not happened yet. It builds walls against floods that never come. It rehearses speeches for conversations that never take place. It braces for impacts that never arrive. And sometimes, if you look closely, if you stop for just a moment and look at yourself, the way the child looked at the traveler, you realize the thing has already happened. The hard conversation already took place. The mistake was already made. The day is already over. And you survived it. And you are still here, still breathing, still lying in the dark, still exactly where you need to be. Tonight, lying where you are, you may notice that your breath has slowed without you deciding to slow it. You may notice that the space behind your eyes has softened, just slightly the way snow softens the edges of a rooftop, not by force but by accumulation. One small flake at a time. You may notice that your jaw has loosened, that your tongue has settled away from the roof of your mouth, that the muscles around your eyes have eased in a way that feels like something between sighing and letting go. This is not something you are doing. This is something your body already knows how to do when the mind stops insisting that there is somewhere else to be. There is nowhere else to be. There is only here, and the sound of these words, and the quiet that lives underneath them, like water under ice. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Breathing in I calm my body. Breathing out I smile." He did not say fix. He did not say solve. He did not say achieve or attain or master. He said calm the way you might calm a child. Not by explaining, not by reasoning, not by listing all the ways things will be fine. Just by being near, just by placing your hand on their back and breathing with them until their breathing matches yours, and the shaking stops, and the world becomes small, enough to hold again. And perhaps that is enough for now. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey. You do not have to go anywhere. The stories will come to you. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another thread in tonight's journey, a quieter one, about something we all carry without knowing we are carrying it. It begins with an old door that would not close properly, and the woman who decided to stop forcing it. In a town built along a canal, where the water moved so slowly it seemed to be thinking, turning over each thought carefully before passing it along to the next stretch of still, dark surface, there lived a schoolteacher who could not leave her work at school. It was not that she loved teaching too much, though she did love it, in the worn and complicated way that people love things they have given decades to. The way you love a coat that no longer fits perfectly, but still smells like every important day you wore it. It was that, every evening, when she walked home along the canal path, with the last of the daylight turning the water amber, and the ducks tucking their heads under their wings for the night, the day followed her. A student had looked confused during her lesson on fractions. Just for a moment, a flicker across the face, the way a shadow crosses a wall when a cloud passes, and she replayed the moment for the entire walk home. She should have explained it differently. She should have used the oranges instead of the pie chart. She should have noticed the confusion earlier, before it had time to settle in and make itself comfortable. She wondered if the child had gone home still confused, if the confusion had followed the child, the way her own thoughts were following her, if the confusion would harden into something permanent, the way wet clay hardens when no one tends to it, and the shape it sets in is the shape it keeps forever. A colleague had said something sharp in the hallway, between second and third period. Something about her lesson plans being old-fashioned, delivered with a smile that was not quite a smile. the way people deliver criticisms they want to pretend are jokes, and the words sat inside her like a stone in a shoe, not painful enough to stop walking, not large enough to justify sitting down and removing the shoe, but impossible to ignore, rubbing against the same spot with every step wearing a small, persistent sore that she could feel even now, hours later lying in bed. She had forgotten to return a phone call from a parent. She had promised to bring photocopies of the permission slip and had not brought them. She had said she would email the reading list by 5 o'clock, and it was now 9:30, and the email was still sitting in her drafts folder, half finished, waiting for her to find the right closing sentence, which she could not find because every sentence she tried sounded either too formal or too casual or too apologetic or not apologetic enough. These were small things. She knew they were small things. If someone had listed them for her, a forgotten phone call, an unsent email, a sharp comment from a colleague, she would have said, "Those are nothing. Those are not worth losing sleep over." And she would have meant it. And she would have been right. And she would have lost sleep over them anyway, because knowing that something is small does not make it feel small at midnight, in the dark, when the mind has nothing else to chew on, and it chews on whatever is available. Her house was modest and clean, the kind of house that reveals its owner's personality, not through decoration, but through order. The front door opened onto a narrow hallway, where she kept her shoes lined up in pairs, heels against the wall, toes pointing outward, arranged by color, without her ever having decided to arrange them by color. It had just happened over time, the way habits form, silently without announcement. There was a hook by the door, where she hung her coat, always the same hook, always the same motion of the hand. A shelf where she placed her keys, always in the ceramic dish her mother had given her. A small table where she set down whatever she had been carrying, papers, a bag sometimes, a book she had been reading on the walk home, but had not actually been reading, because her mind was still in the classroom, still at the whiteboard, still watching the flicker cross the student's face. She was a person of habits. She liked the order of it. She liked that each thing had its place, that the keys went in the dish, and the coat went on the hook, and the shoes went against the wall. There was comfort in the predictability, in the small daily proof that some things, at least, could be put where they belonged and trusted to stay there. But she had no place for the day. She set down her coat, her keys, her bag, and the day stayed on her shoulders, invisible and heavy, following her into the kitchen, where she boiled water for tea she did not drink, into the bath, where she sat in warm water and reviewed every conversation she had had since 7:30 that morning, into bed, where she lay on her side and stared at the wall, and the day sat on the pillow beside her, like a patient animal that would not leave. One autumn the canal was being repaired. The city had decided that the stone walls beneath the waterline were crumbling, slowly, the way stone crumbles, over decades, molecule by molecule, surrendering to the water's patience. And they drained a section of it so the workers could reach the walls underneath. She walked past the drained section every morning on her way to school and every evening on her way home, and she noticed something that surprised her. The bottom of the canal was full of things. Bicycles, 3 of them, rusted beyond recognition, their wheels bent into shapes that no longer resembled circles. Bottles, dozens of bottles, some broken, some intact, their labels dissolved into nothing. An old chair with one leg missing, sitting upright on the canal floor, as if someone had placed it there deliberately, as if someone had once sat in the canal, and watched the water rise around them. A child's shoe, just one, its mate lost to some other stretch of water, or some other story entirely. Coins so dark with age, they looked like pebbles, so worn that whatever face or symbol they once carried had been erased by years of water and silt and the slow, indifferent friction of time. All of this had been sitting beneath the surface for years, invisible, forgotten, but still there, still taking up space, still weighing down the bottom of a canal that everyone walked past every day without knowing what it was carrying. She stood, looking at it one evening as the sun went down behind the rooftops, turning the wet stone gold and the exposed silt a color between brown and amber that she had no name for. The workers had gone home. The drain section was quiet. The smell was not unpleasant, earthy, mineral, the smell of things that have been underwater for a long time and are surprised to find themselves in the air again. And a thought came to her that she did not plan and did not invite. The way thoughts sometimes arrive like birds landing on a wire, without warning, without reason, just suddenly there, looking at you as if they have been waiting for you to notice them. She thought, I am the canal. The Buddha once offered a teaching so simple that it is easy to walk past it. The way you walk past a door you have seen 1,000 times and stopped seeing because familiarity makes things invisible. He said that suffering is not caused by what happens to us. It is caused by what we refuse to set down. He did not say this harshly. He was not scolding anyone. He was not wagging a finger at a room full of students who should have known better. He was observing, the way a gardener observes that a plant bends toward light. Not judging, not correcting, just noticing. It is just what happens. We pick things up during the day. Words worry, small failures, unfinished tasks, fragments of conversation that we are not sure what to do with. And we carry them. Not because we want to, not because carrying them makes us feel better, but because no one ever told us we were allowed to put them down. No one ever said the carrying was optional. No one ever pointed at the ceramic dish by the door and said, you can put the day there, too. And that is the first way to hear this teaching. As permission, not permission to forget, not permission to stop caring, not permission to become careless or indifferent or cold, just permission to set the bundle down for a few hours and trust that it will still be there in the morning if you need it. It will not dissolve in the night. It will not wander off. The forgotten phone call will still be forgotten. The unsent email will still be in drafts. The colleague's sharp comment will still be sharp. Everything will be exactly where you left it, waiting for you, the way threads wait for the net mender. And most of it, you will find, when you pick it up again in the morning light, is lighter than you remembered. And some of it, you will find, you do not need at all. There is a second way to hear this teaching, quieter, and perhaps closer to what the Buddha meant. It is not that you are holding on to the day. It is that you have mistaken the holding for safety somewhere long ago, so long ago, that you cannot remember the decision, the way you cannot remember learning to blink. Your mind decided that if it kept reviewing, kept rehearsing, kept turning things over, kept examining every moment from every angle, it could prevent something bad from happening. If I just think about it enough, I will be ready. If I just replay it one more time, I will find the mistake. If I just hold on tight enough, nothing will slip through. And so it holds and holds and holds, like someone gripping the edge of a boat in still water, knuckles, white arms trembling, not realizing that the water is calm and the boat is not going anywhere, and the gripping itself is the only thing making the ride uncomfortable. Tonight you do not need to let go of anything. That phrase, let go, can feel like one more thing to do. One more task on a list that is already too long. One more instruction from one more voice, telling you what you should be doing differently. Instead, consider this. What if the letting go has already begun? What if the act of lying here, listening, breathing, letting the words wash past you without trying to catch any of them? What if that is itself the setting down? Not dramatic, not decisive, not a moment of breakthrough or epiphany or transformation, just the slow, natural release of fingers that have been gripping all day and have finally, quietly, without announcement or ceremony, forgotten what they were holding. There was a carpenter, an old man who lived alone in a house he had built himself, plank by plank over the course of many years. He had started building it when he was young, and his wife was alive, and the house was going to have 4 rooms, and a porch, and a garden. And then his wife had died. Suddenly, the way people die sometimes. Not at the end of a long illness, not after a period of preparation and goodbye, but on a Tuesday, without warning, between breakfast and lunch, and he had kept building. Not because he still needed 4 rooms, because his hands needed something to do, because the measuring and cutting and fitting of wood was the only language he had left for the things he could not say. The house was good. The joints were tight. The floors did not creak. He had sanded every surface by hand until the wood was smooth enough to press your cheek against, which he sometimes did in the evenings, standing alone in the hallway, with his face against the doorframe, feeling the deep grain under his skin the way a blind person reads, the way a person who has lost something important touches the place where it used to be. But there was one door in the house that did not close properly, the bedroom door. It had warped over time. Wood does that, slowly, invisibly, responding to moisture and heat and seasons, the way all living things respond to the world around them, changing shape so gradually that you do not notice, until one day, the door that used to click shut now hangs open by an inch. The door still fit in the frame, but it no longer latched. If you closed it and walked away, it would drift open on its own, quietly, stubbornly, an inch or two, just enough to let in a sliver of hallway light that fell across the bed like a pale finger pointing at nothing. For years he tried to fix it. He planed the edge, first a shaving, then 2, then enough that he worried he had taken too much, and the gap would be too wide. He adjusted the hinges, loosening, tightening, shimming with thin strips of cardboard that compressed over time and stopped working. He replaced the latch entirely, a new brass latch, expensive, precise, the kind that closes with a satisfying click. Each fix worked for a week, sometimes a month, and then the door would drift open again, quiet and stubborn, as if it had its own opinion about how things should be, as if it had listened politely to all his solutions and decided with the calm certainty of something that does not need to explain itself, that it preferred to stay open. One night, lying in bed, watching the door stand slightly open, the way it always did, the sliver of hallway, light falling across the floor in its usual place, he stopped seeing it as a problem. He could not say why. He could not point to a thought or a realization or a moment of clarity. Maybe he was tired, not the tired of one day, but the tired of years. The accumulated exhaustion of fighting something that did not want to be fought. Maybe he was old enough to know that some things resist fixing, not because they are broken, but because they are doing something you have not understood yet, something you need them to do, something that serves a purpose you cannot see because you have been looking at it as a flaw. The door was not failing to close. The door was letting in just enough light that he could see the hallway, when he lay on his side, and the hallway was where his wife's photograph hung. A small photograph in a wooden frame, taken on a day he could no longer remember the details of, but could still feel the warmth of. The way you feel the warmth of a fire that went out hours ago, if you hold your hand close enough to the ashes, and some part of him, some part deeper than carpentry, deeper than engineering, deeper than the part of him that solved problems and fixed things, and made joints tight, had known this all along, had known that the door was not broken, had known that the light was not an accident, had known that some openings are not failures, but invitations, and that the correct response to an invitation is not to seal the door, but to accept what is being offered. He never fixed the door again, and he slept better after that. Not because the problem was solved, because he stopped calling it a problem, because he let it be what it was. A door that preferred to stay open, a sliver of light, a photograph in the hallway, a connection to something he loved that he did not have to let go of entirely in order to rest. Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." And perhaps the same is true of rest. The mind that insists on solving the day before it can sleep has very few possibilities. It can only sleep after everything is fixed, after every email is sent, after every conversation has been reviewed and graded and filed. But the mind that is willing to let the day remain unsolved, unfinished, imperfect, still open like a door that will not latch, that mind has room for sleep. Because sleep does not require perfection. Sleep requires permission. And permission is something you can give yourself right now, tonight, without fixing a single thing. A leaf does not decide to fall. It does not plan the letting go, does not choose the moment, does not brace itself, or take a deep breath or count to 3. It does not weigh the pros and cons of staying attached. It does not wonder whether it should have held on longer, whether the other leaves are judging it, whether falling is a failure or a success. It simply reaches the point where the branch can no longer hold it, or where it can no longer hold the branch. It is hard to say which, and it separates. Not with violence, not with grief, not with the dramatic finality of something ending, with the quiet ease of something that has completed its season and knows, without being told, that completion is not the same as failure. And as it falls, it does not look back at the tree and wonder if it should have held on longer. It does not compare itself to the leaves that are still attached. It turns in the air, catches the light once, a small flash of gold or red or brown that no one may even notice, and lands where it lands. And where it lands becomes, for a while, a kind of home. You have completed your season today, whatever the day held, the conversations, the decisions, the small things done and the small things left undone, the kindnesses you offered and the kindnesses you forgot to offer. It is finished, not because everything was resolved, not because every task was completed and every thread was tied and every door was properly latched, because the hour for resolving has passed and the hour for resting has come. They are different hours. They ask different things of you. And right now this hour is only asking you to be here. That is all, just here, just breathing, just letting the day fall away from you, the way a leaf falls from a tree, not because you pushed it, but because it was ready. The Buddhist is sometimes paraphrased as saying, in the end only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Whether or not he said exactly this, the kindness in it is unmistakable. It does not say let go of everything. It does not say let go quickly or easily or without feeling. It says let go of what was not meant for you. And perhaps tonight, lying in the dark with the day, still sitting on the pillow beside you, like a patient animal, you can look at what you are carrying and ask, gently, without judgment, without urgency, how much of this is mine? How much of this was ever mine? And how much of it was just something I picked up along the way because it was there, and my hands were open, and no one told me I was allowed to walk past it. And perhaps that is enough for now. Let your body settle a little deeper into wherever it is resting. Let the canal drain. Let the things that have been sitting on the bottom, the bicycles and the bottles and the coins and the small sharp comments from colleagues, let them sit there in the air for a moment, seen at last, and then let the water come back in, slowly, gently covering them again, not hiding them, just letting them rest where they are while you rest where you are. There is no urgency in anything that follows. There is only the next story, and the next, and the quiet that grows between them. When you are ready, we will continue together. What comes next begins not with a person, but with a pair of hands. Hands that held on so tightly to something beautiful that they almost crushed it. In a valley where the mist came down so thick in the mornings that you could not see your own feet on the path, where the air tasted of damp leaves and cold stone, and the particular green sweetness of moss that has been growing in the same place for longer than anyone alive can remember. There lived a woman who grew orchids, not the common kind that grow in any window, the cheerful, forgiving kind that bloom even when you forget them, even when the light is wrong, even when the cat knocks them off the sill. She grew the rare ones, the difficult ones, the ones that needed exact temperatures and exact humidity and exact amounts of water, measured in drops, not cups delivered at exact intervals, with a small glass pipette she had bought from a laboratory supply, catalogued and cleaned with distilled water after every use. Her greenhouse sat behind her house, built against a south-facing wall, where the sun reached it for exactly 4 hours each afternoon. Not 3, not 5, but 4, because she had tracked the light with a notebook and a pencil for an entire year before she chose the spot. The glass was old and slightly green, the kind of glass they do not make anymore. And when the afternoon light came through it, everything inside took on the quality of being underwater. The plants, the wooden shelves, the terracotta pots, the woman herself, all of it drifting in a dim green glow that made the greenhouse feel less like a room and more like a memory of a room, something you might see in a dream and recognize without being able to say why. She had been growing orchids for 15 years. She could tell when a plant was unhappy by the way its leaves tilted, a fraction of a degree, barely visible to anyone else. The way a person's smile changes when they are pretending to be fine and are not fine and do not want you to ask. She knew which ones liked to be spoken to and which ones preferred silence. She knew that the pale yellow one near the door bloomed only in February, and only if December had been cold enough, and only if she had moved it 6 inches to the left in November so that the winter sun hit its roots at the angle they preferred. These were not things she had read in books or learned from other growers. These were things she had learned the way you learn a person, slowly, through years of paying attention, through mistakes that taught her more than any success, through the accumulation of small knowings that cannot be written down because they live not in the mind but in the hands, in the eyes, in the part of you that notices without deciding to notice. But there was one orchid she could not make bloom. She had bought it from a traveling seller who came through the valley once a year with a truck full of plants wrapped in damp newspaper. He told her it was very old and very rare, a species she had only seen in photographs, in books with Latin names and glossy pages. He told her it had bloomed once, years ago, a single white flower, so perfect that the woman who owned it before had wept. Not from sadness, from the shock of seeing something so beautiful that the body does not know what to do with the feeling. And so it cries, the way your eyes water when you step outside into sudden bright sunlight. She had carried it home like a newborn, cradled in both hands, walking slowly so as not to jostle the roots. She had given it the best spot in the greenhouse, the one where the light was softest and the temperature never dropped below 16 degrees, and the humidity held steady at 70%, because she had hung a wet cloth from the rafter above and replaced it every morning. She had measured the water, she had adjusted the soil, a special mix of bark and charcoal and sphagnum moss that she had blended herself, testing different ratios over months, until she found the one that felt right between her fingers, the one that held moisture without drowning, the one that breathed. 3 years passed 4-5. The orchid grew leaves, dark, thick, healthy leaves with a shine that said the plant was strong. The plant was alive. The plant was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It grew roots, long, pale roots that reached out of the pot and hung in the air like fingers searching for something to hold. It was alive undeniably, stubbornly, even triumphantly alive. But it did not bloom, and with each passing season, each February that came and went without a bud, each spring that arrived with nothing but more leaves and more roots and more evidence of life, but not the life she wanted. Her attention, too, it changed. The tenderness curdled into frustration, the way milk curdles, not all at once but gradually, molecule by molecule, until the thing that was sweet becomes the thing that is sour, and you cannot find the exact moment when the change happened. The frustration became something else, something harder to name, something that looked from the outside like love but felt from the inside like hunger. She wanted the flower, not the plant, the flower, the single perfect white bloom that someone else had seen and she had not, and the wanting grew heavier each year, the way a stone grows heavier the longer you carry it, not because the stone has changed, not because it has gained weight or grown larger, but because your arms have grown tired, and the tiredness makes everything feel heavier than it is. One afternoon, a man who delivered soil and supplies stopped by the greenhouse. He was not a gardener. He was a man who drove a truck and carried heavy bags on his shoulders and smelled of diesel and earth and the particular honest sweat of someone who works with his body all day. He knew nothing about orchids. He could not tell a phalaenopsis from a dendrobium, and if you had asked him what epiphytic meant, he would have guessed it was a disease. But he had been delivering to her for years, and he noticed things the way people who are quiet notice things, not by looking for them, but by being present long enough that the things reveal themselves. "You look tired," he said, setting down a bag of bark mulch that landed on the greenhouse floor with a soft thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. "I am tired," she said. She was standing in front of the orchid, the one that would not bloom, staring at it the way you stare at a locked door when you have lost the key, with a mixture of longing and frustration, and the particular helplessness of someone who has tried everything and everything has not been enough. He looked at the plant. He looked at it the way someone who knows nothing about orchids looks at an orchid, without expectation, without history, without 5 years of accumulated wanting. "Seems healthy to me," he said. "It will not bloom." He shrugged. It was not a dismissive shrug. It was the shrug of a man who carries bags for a living and has learned that some things are heavy and some things are not. And the trick is knowing which is which. Maybe it does not want to bloom, he said. She turned to him, and there was something sharp in her eyes, something that had been building for 5 years and had found, in his casual shrug, a surface to strike against. Everything wants to bloom, she said. That is the whole point. That is what plants do. They grow, and they bloom, and the bloom is the reason for the growing. He scratched the back of his neck. He was not a man who argued. He was a man who delivered things, and picked up empty bags, and drove his truck home at the end of the day, and did not lie awake at night, wondering if the bags had been heavy enough, or if the deliveries had been perfect. I had a dog once, he said, and his voice had the unhurried quality of someone who is going to tell a story, whether or not anyone has asked for one. Good dog loved to run. Fastest dog on the street. You should have seen him in the park. Legs going so fast they blurred, ears flying back, tongue out, pure joy. I wanted him to fetch, throw a stick. Dog brings it back. Simple as that. Every dog does it. It is what dogs do. He picked up the empty bags and started folding them, his hands moving automatically, the way hands move when they have done the same thing 10,000 times. He would not do it. I threw the stick 1,000 times. He would watch it fly through the air. He would watch it land. And then he would look at me. Just look at me. With those big brown eyes. As if to say, that was a fine throw. Why would I bring it back? He tucked the folded bags under his arm. Loved me, followed me everywhere. Slept at my feet every single night, his nose on my shoe. Best dog I ever had, and I spent 2 years being disappointed in him. 2 years wanting him to be a different dog. 2 years throwing a stick at a dog who wanted to run. He walked out to his truck. The greenhouse door swung shut behind him with a soft click. She stood there in the green underwater light, with the orchid in front of her, and the quiet pressing in from all sides, and something shifted, not dramatically, not like a door slamming, or a light switching on, or the ground opening up beneath her. More like the tide, the way the tide shifts, so slowly you do not see it happening, so gradually that you only notice when you look down and realize the water is touching your feet, when a moment ago it was not. Something had been moving inside her for a long time, and his story, his simple, unasked for story about a dog and a stick, had given it permission to arrive. She had been holding the orchid so tightly, not with her hands, but with her wanting, that she had stopped seeing what it actually was. It was alive, it was green, it was growing. It was reaching out with its pale roots into the air, searching for moisture, finding it, drinking it in, doing exactly what it was designed to do, with a quiet competence that asked nothing of her except to be left alone. And she had been standing over it for 5 years, staring at it, measuring it, adjusting its soil, worrying about its light, checking its leaves for signs of the one thing she wanted, the bloom, the flower, the proof. And she had never once stepped back and simply seen it. The plant, not the potential, not the promise, not the story she had bought from a traveling seller about a flower so perfect it made someone weep. The plant, this plant here, now alive enough. The Buddha called this upadana, clinging, not in a dramatic way, not the desperate, white-knuckled grip of someone hanging from a cliff edge while the wind howls, the quiet, invisible grip of someone who has decided how things should be and cannot stop comparing reality to the picture in their mind. It is the distance between what is and what you wanted. It is the gap between the orchid that grows and the orchid that blooms. And the gap, not the orchid, is the source of the suffering. The gap is the weight. The gap is the thing that keeps you standing in a greenhouse at the end of a long day, staring at a healthy plant and feeling only what it has not given you. And tonight, lying here, you may recognize this grip in yourself. Not the big attachments, not the ones you could name if someone asked, the ones that have labels and histories and explanations, the small ones, the invisible ones, the way the day should have gone, the thing you wanted someone to say that they did not say, the version of yourself you woke up planning to be, organized, patient, productive, kind, and the version you actually were, which was human, which is to say, imperfect, which is to say, real. The distance between those two, between what is and what you wanted, that distance is the weight. And you have been carrying it all day without knowing it had a name. An old Zen saying puts it this way: the barn has burned down. Now I can see the moon. Not because the barn was bad, not because burning is good, but because sometimes the things we build to hold what we love become the very walls that block our view. Sometimes the greenhouse we construct around the thing we are trying to protect is the thing that prevents us from seeing the sky. There was a fisherman, a young man, barely 20, with the kind of lean, weathered strength that comes from growing up on the water, who lived on an island where the tides changed so fast that you had to know the water the way you know a conversation, reading what it was about to say before it said it, feeling the pause before the shift, the way a musician feels the pause before the key change. He was good with boats. He had grown up on them. His hands knew ropes the way the orchid woman's hands knew soil, intimately, instinctively, without thought. He had a boat of his own, small, wooden, painted blue, with paint that was chipping at the waterline. There was a patch on the hull where he had hit a rock 2 summers ago and repaired it himself, filling the crack with epoxy and sanding it smooth and painting over it with a blue that did not quite match the original blue. So there was a small rectangle on the hull that was slightly darker, like a scar that has healed but not disappeared. The oarlocks squeaked. The floorboards were stained with fish scales that no amount of scrubbing could remove. There was a smell, salt and fish and old wood, and the particular dampness of a boat that spends its life half in water, that had soaked into every plank and every joint and had become, over time, not a smell but an identity. The boat smelled like itself. It smelled like his life. It was not a beautiful boat, he knew this. He had seen the boats in the harbor of the main island. Sleek fiberglass hulls, chrome fittings, names painted in elegant script. His boat had no name. It had a number painted on the bow that was required by the harbor authority, and the number was peeling, but it was his. He had saved for it. Coin, working other men's boats for 3 years, mending nets, hauling catch, doing the work that no one else wanted to do, in the early hours when the water was cold and the sky was still dark, and when he finally had enough, he bought it from an old man who was retiring, and he sailed it home alone, and the feeling of the tiller in his hand, and the wind in the sail, and the water moving beneath him, that feeling was the first time in his life he had understood the word freedom, and he loved it, the way young men love the first thing that is truly theirs, fiercely, completely, without the perspective that comes from having loved and lost and loved again. He loved it the way you love, before you know that love and loss are the same river flowing in the same direction. One autumn, a storm came through the island, not the worst storm anyone remembered. The old fisherman had stories of storms that tore roofs from houses and pushed the sea a mile inland and left boats in the middle of fields, stranded like fish on dry land. This was not that. This was an ordinary bad storm, the kind that comes every few years, the kind you prepare for by tying things down and filling the bathtub with water and going to bed, hoping. The wind tore shingles from roofs. The rain came sideways. The water in the harbor rose above the pier, covering the bollards, covering the cleats, covering the ropes that were supposed to hold the boats in place. And when the morning came, grey and exhausted and smelling of wet earth and broken branches, his boat was gone. The rope had snapped in the night, not the good rope, the old rope, the one he had been meaning to replace since August, the one he had looked at a dozen times and thought, it will hold one more season. It will hold one more storm. It is not that worn. I will replace it next month. The boat had drifted out on the surge, and the sea had taken it, the way the sea takes everything it wants, without asking, without apology, without leaving a receipt. All that was left was the frayed end of the rope tied to the post, moving gently in the calmer water, like a hand waving goodbye to someone who was already too far away to see. He stood on the pier and felt something enormous open up inside him, something dark and bottomless, a hole in the center of his chest that the wind blew straight through. And he thought, with the absolute certainty of someone who has not yet learned that certainty is the most fragile thing in the world. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. An old woman who sold fish from a wooden stall near the harbor watched him from behind her counter. She had seen storms before. She had seen boats lost and boats found and boats that were never seen again. She had seen young men stand on piers and stare at the water with that exact expression, the expression of someone whose world has suddenly become smaller by one important thing. She had worn that expression herself more than once for things heavier than boats. "Come," she said. Her voice was calm but not soft, the voice of someone who does not waste gentleness on distance. "Sit down. Eat something." He sat on the wooden crate she offered, the one she usually stacked empty baskets on, and she cleared the baskets without comment. He did not eat. He could not eat. His stomach was a fist. "My boat," he said. "I know, it was everything I had." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up a piece of bread from behind the counter. Dark bread, the kind she baked herself on Sundays, dense and chewy and tasting of rye and molasses, and she placed it in front of him. It was a boat. She said. He looked up. There was something sharp forming behind his eyes, the beginning of anger, the beginning of the argument that everything inside him wanted to make, that it was not just a boat, that it was his life, that she did not understand, but her face stopped him. She was not dismissing him. She was not minimizing his loss. She was doing something more difficult. She was seeing his loss clearly, seeing exactly how large it was, and telling him, gently, firmly, with the authority of someone who has lost larger things, that it was not the largest thing in the world, not because it was small, because the world is very, very large. "When I was your age," she said, leaning her elbows on the counter, "I held everything, like it was the last thing I would ever hold. My husband, my house, my health, my daughter's laugh, the sound of my mother's voice. I held them the way you hold water, with cupped hands, pressed tight together, terrified of the leaking, trying to keep every drop." She paused. The harbor was quiet around them. The storm was gone, but the sky was still grey, still heavy, still deciding whether it was finished. And one by one, the sea took them. Not all at once. That would have been easier. In a way, slowly. The way the sea takes everything slowly. The way the tide comes in so gradually that you do not notice your feet are wet until your ankles are underwater. She picked up a fish from the counter and began to clean it, her knife moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has cleaned 10,000 fish and could clean 10,000 more without thinking about it. And each time, she said, I thought I would not survive it. Each time, I was sure this was the one that would break me. And each time I was wrong. Not because I was strong, because surviving is what people do. It is not a talent. It is not a choice. It is just what happens when you keep breathing. He looked at her. The anger had drained away, replaced by something quieter. Not peace, not acceptance, but the beginning of the long, slow process that might someday become acceptance. Does it stop hurting? He asked. No, she said. She did not hesitate. She did not soften the word. But you stop calling it the worst thing. You start calling it the thing that happened, and then after a while, a long while, longer than you want, you stop calling it anything at all. It is just the shape of your life, and your life, even with that shape, even with the missing pieces, and the rough edges, and the places where the paint does not quite match, your life is still your life. And it is still worth living, and the sea, for all it has taken, has not taken that. He ate the bread. It was dry and dense and tasted like salt. From the bread or from the tears, he was not aware he was crying. He could not tell, and he noticed without wanting to, without giving himself permission to notice, that the morning was beautiful. The storm had cleaned the air the way crying cleans the face, roughly, without elegance but thoroughly. The water in the harbor was a color of blue he had never seen before. The kind of blue that only exists after something has been taken away. The kind of blue that you cannot find on any paint chart, because it is not a color, but a feeling. And the feeling is the raw, tender, unbearable beauty of a world that is still here. Dogen, the great Zen master, once wrote, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. And perhaps what he meant was this, that the things we grip most tightly are often the things that keep us from seeing everything else. Not because they are bad, not because we should not love them, because our hands are full. And a hand that is full cannot receive. A hand that is gripping cannot be touched. A hand that is closed around one thing, one boat, one orchid, one version of the day, one idea of how life should be. That hand is holding one thing and missing everything else. There is an old parable about a monkey and a jar. A hunter places a banana inside a jar with a narrow neck, narrow enough that a hand can reach in, but a fist cannot come out. The monkey reaches in. The monkey grabs the banana. The monkey's fist is now too large to pull through the neck. The monkey is trapped. Not by the jar is not locked. Not by a chain or a cage or a wall. By its own grip, by its own refusal to open its hand and release the thing it is holding. The hunter walks over slowly, without hurrying, without worry, because he knows the monkey will not let go. He knows that the monkey will sit there, arm in the jar, fist around the banana, watching the hunter approach, and it will not release what it is holding. Not because it is stupid, because the grip has become the monkey's identity, because the monkey has confused holding with having and having with being, and it cannot imagine itself as a monkey without a banana, even though that is exactly what it was 10 minutes ago, before it reached into the jar when it was free. The jar is not locked. The monkey is not chained. The door is wide open. The entire forest is waiting. The only thing between the monkey and freedom is the decision to open its hand. And that decision, the simplest, most obvious decision in the world, the one that any outside observer could see in an instant, is the one the monkey cannot make. Because the banana feels too important. Because the letting go feels too much like losing. Because the grip by now feels like the only thing that is real. You are not the monkey. But you have a banana. Everyone does. Some small thing. A grudge you have been polishing for years. A regret you take out and examine every night. A hope that has outlived its season and sits in the jar of your mind. Brown and soft, no longer nourishing. Anyone that you are holding inside a jar you could walk away from at any time. And tonight, in the dark, with your eyes closed and your body heavy, and the world outside doing whatever the world does at this hour, spinning, breathing, being indifferent and beautiful and vast, you might feel your fingers begin to loosen. Not because you decided to, not because someone told you to let go, because sleep, when it comes, opens the hand for you. It is one of sleep's oldest kindnesses. It takes the banana gently, sets it aside, and leads you into the forest with both hands free. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness." He did not say it is easy. He did not say it happens quickly. He did not promise that the letting go would not hurt. He said it is the condition, the door, the first step, and steps, even small ones, even ones taken in the dark, even ones taken lying down. Steps are still steps, and you are still moving. Let us rest here for a moment. The stories will wait. They have nowhere to be, and neither do you. Take a breath, not a special breath, not a deep breath, not a breath you have to do correctly. Just the one that is already happening, the one your body is giving you right now, without asking for anything in return. Feel the surface beneath you holding your weight. It has been holding you this whole time, through all the stories, through all the words, through all the letting go, and the not letting go, and the slow, uncertain space between them. It has been holding you. And it has not asked you to be lighter. When you are ready, we will continue together. What follows is a different kind of stillness. Not the stillness of letting go, but the stillness you find when you stop trying to hold the world still and let it move around you. It begins with a woman at a loom and the sound her shuttle makes as it crosses from one side to the other, and the young man at the window who could not understand why watching her made his mind go quiet. Have you ever watched someone who is very good at what they do? A person pouring tea, a person folding cloth, a person walking through a crowded room full of noise and elbows and spilled drinks, and notice that they seem to move inside a pocket of quiet. The room is loud, but they are not. The world is rushing, but they are not. They are not slow exactly. If you watched their hands might be moving quickly, folding, pouring, reaching, placing, but something about them is still. Something at the center of all that motion is not moving at all. The way the center of a wheel does not move, even when the rim is spinning. The way the eye of a storm is calm, even while the wind around it tears at everything. This is not a skill. It is not something you learn from a book, or a weekend retreat, or a teacher who charges by the hour. It is not something you earn through practice, the way you earn a callus or a diploma. It is something you remember, the way your body remembers how to float if you stop thrashing, the way your hands remember how to hold a cup if you stop thinking about holding a cup, the way a child falls asleep in a car, not by trying, not by concentrating, but by surrendering to the motion, until the motion becomes stillness, and the stillness becomes sleep. You knew how to do this once. You did it every day. And the knowing is still in you, buried under years of trying, waiting for you to stop trying long enough to find it again. Stillness is not the opposite of motion. It is what lives inside motion when you stop adding anything extra, when you stop narrating, when you stop judging, when you stop comparing this moment to the moment you think you should be having. It is the silence inside the music, not the silence between the notes, but the silence that makes the notes possible, the way darkness makes light visible, the way the empty space inside a bowl is what makes the bowl useful. The Buddhist once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." But he did not mean concentrate the way you concentrate on a difficult problem. Tight, furrowed, effortful, the muscles behind your eyes, clenching like fists. He meant something much gentler, something closer to what happens when you listen to rain. You are not trying to hear it. You are not working at it. You are not grading yourself on how well you are listening. The rain is there, and you are there. And for a moment, sometimes just a heartbeat, sometimes longer, there is nothing between you and the sound. No interpretation, no opinion, no story about what the rain means or what you should do about it. Just the sound and you, and the thin, luminous thread that connects them. A weaver lived at the edge of a forest where the trees were so tall that the sunlight reached the ground only in pieces. Small coins of gold scattered across the moss, shifting whenever the wind moved the canopy above, appearing and disappearing like thoughts that come and go without being asked. Her cottage was small and made of stone, and the walls were thick enough that the inside stayed cool in summer and warm in winter, without anyone having to do anything about it. The forest did the work. The stone remembered. Her loom sat near the window, positioned so that the morning light fell across the threads at exactly the right angle for her to see the colors clearly. The deep reds and the soft blues and the greens that were so close to the color of the forest outside that sometimes a thread of green on the loom and a leaf on the branch outside the window seemed to be the same thing, the same green living in two places at once. She had chosen this spot 20 years ago, the first day she moved in, standing in the empty room with the loom still in pieces on the floor, turning slowly until the light from the window touched her face, and she felt it, and she knew. Some decisions once made well do not need to be revisited. Some things you get right the first time, and the rightness of them holds for years, the way a good knot holds. The loom was old, built by her grandmother from a wood so dark it looked almost black, polished by decades of oil and handling until it gleamed with the deep, quiet shine of something that has been loved for a long time by many hands. The shuttle was smooth from 3 generations of fingers. Her grandmother's fingers, thick and square. Her mother's fingers, longer and thinner. Her own somewhere in between, colloused at the tips where the thread ran. When she worked, the rhythm was steady and hypnotic, a soft clacking that blended with the bird song outside until you could not tell where one ended and the other began, until the sound of the loom and the sound of the forest became one sound, one rhythm, one breath. Thread over thread under, press slide thread over, thread under press. Slide. Her feet work the pedals below. Her hands moved above and in between, in the space where her body lived. She swayed gently, like a tree that has learned to move with the wind rather than against it. She was not a quiet person. She laughed loudly. the kind of laugh that made strangers turn their heads in the market. She argued with the merchant who bought her cloth, haggling over prices with a cheerful stubbornness that he pretended to resent and secretly enjoyed. She sang when she cooked old songs, slightly off-key, the kind of songs that are better for being imperfect, the way bread is better for being homemade. But when she sat at the loom, something changed. Not her personality, something deeper. The restlessness that lived in her, the same restlessness that lives in all of us. The constant low hum of should and next, and what if and did I and will they, went quiet, not silent quiet. The way a river is quiet, even though it is always moving. The way the forest is quiet, even though 100 birds are singing. Her neighbor, a young man who made charcoal for a living, walked past her window every morning on his way to the forest, and every evening on his way home. His clothes were always dark with soot. His hands were always black. He smelled of smoke and hot wood and the particular bitter sweetness of things that have been burned down to their essence. He watched her through the window sometimes as he passed. Not because he was curious about weaving, not because he found her beautiful, though she was beautiful in the way that people who are absorbed in their work are always beautiful. He watched because he was curious about the quiet. He wanted to understand how a person could sit in one place, doing one thing for hours, and look not bored but complete. He was a person whose mind never stopped. It planned while he ate. It worried while he walked. It rehearsed conversations that had not happened yet, and replayed conversations that had happened long ago and would never happen again. His mind was a room with too many doors, and every door was open, and through every door came wind. One afternoon, he stopped at her window. The autumn light was low and golden, and it made the threads on her loom glow, as if they were lit from inside. "How do you do that?" he asked. She did not stop weaving. The shuttle crossed. The beater pressed. The thread settled into place. Do what? Become so still. When you sit there, you look like a different person. You look like someone who has found the thing everyone else is looking for. She smiled, and the shuttle kept moving. "I am not still," she said. "Look at my hands." He looked. Her hands were in constant motion, fingers threading, pulling, pressing, guiding the shuttle, catching it on the other side, sending it back. The shuttle flew back and forth so fast it blurred, a small wooden torpedo crossing and recrossing the warp threads with a speed that seemed impossible for something powered only by a woman's wrist. "You see," she said, "I am moving all the time. Every part of me is moving. My hands, my feet, my arms, even my breathing. Everything is in motion. But I am not going anywhere. I am right here. And that is the difference. Motion without departure. Movement without escape. That is what stillness actually is. Not the absence of motion, but the absence of the need to be somewhere else." He frowned. His mind, which was always running, could not quite catch this idea. It slipped through his fingers, the way water slips through a net. "I do not understand," he said. "You walk to the forest every morning," she said, still weaving, still not looking at him. "While you walk, where is your mind?" He thought about it. He was honest, the kind of honest that comes from being too tired to lie. "Everywhere," he said, thinking about the charcoal, thinking about whether the kiln is hot enough, thinking about the weather, about money, about what I will eat tonight, thinking about a conversation I had 3 days ago that I wish had gone differently. "And your feet?" "My feet are on the path." "Your feet are always on the path," She said, your feet never leave. Your feet are the most faithful part of you, and you never thank them for it. They carry you to the forest and they carry you home, and they never once wander off to think about the kiln, or the weather, or the conversation from 3 days ago. They just walk, step after step after step, and they have been doing this your entire life, without complaint, without distraction, without needing to be anywhere other than where they are. She pressed the beater forward, and the new thread settled into the fabric with a sound like a whisper, agreeing with itself. The softest, most satisfied sound, the sound of something arriving exactly where it was meant to be. When I sit here, she said, I do not try to be still. Trying to be still is like trying to be tall. You cannot effort your way into it. I simply let my hands do what they know how to do. They have been doing it for 20 years. They do not need my supervision, and I stay with them. Not ahead of them, not behind them, with them. I do not think about the cloth I am making, or the cloth I made yesterday, or the cloth I will make tomorrow. I think about this thread, this one, the one that is crossing right now, in this moment under my fingers, and the stillness comes on its own. I do not invite it. I do not summon it. It just comes the way warmth comes when you stop walking into the wind. He stood there for a while, watching her hands, and something in the rhythm began to work on him, not on his mind, which was still chattering, still opening doors, still letting in wind, but on something beneath his mind, something older, something that remembered a time before the chattering began. The steady clack of the loom, the soft hiss of the shuttle crossing, the creak of the pedals under her feet. He noticed, without deciding to notice, that his shoulders had dropped, that his jaw had unclenched, that his hands, which had been balled into loose fists at his sides, the way they always were, had opened, and he noticed that, for the first time, in as long as he could remember, his mind was not planning the next thing. It was not rehearsing or reviewing or running ahead. It was just here, at a window in the golden light, watching thread become cloth. Zen Master Bankei once told his students, abide in the unborn mind. His students found this confusing, the way students always find simple things confusing, because simplicity, when you are used to complexity, looks suspicious. What does it mean? The unborn mind. Where is it? How do you get there? Do you meditate your way to it? Do you study for it? Is there a test? And Bankei would say, quite simply, that you are already there. You have always been there. The unborn mind is not a place you travel to. It is the place you are standing. It is the mind before you add worry to it, before you add opinion to it, before you add yesterday and tomorrow to it. It is the mind that is hearing these words right now, not judging them, not filing them, not deciding whether they are useful or true or relevant, just hearing them, the way a bowl receives water, without effort, without opinion, without the need to do anything with what it receives. You are in the unborn mind more often than you think. When you watch a bird cross a window, and for 1 second you forget to be yourself, forget your name, your job, your problems, your plans, and you are just a pair of eyes watching, a pair of wings. When you take the first sip of something warm, and your whole body says, yes, before your mind has time to name what it is tasting. When you are falling asleep and the thoughts begin to dissolve, and the shapes behind your eyelids stop meaning anything and start being just shapes, colors without names, movements without destinations. And there is a moment, a small bright moment, when you are neither awake nor asleep, but simply present in a way that has no edges. These are not special moments. They are not peak experiences. They are ordinary. They happen every day, sometimes many times a day, and you step over them every time on your way to somewhere you think is more important. There was a monastery, a very old one, built into the side of a hill, so that the upper floors seemed to grow out of the rock itself, as if the building had not been constructed, but had emerged, slowly, over centuries. The way mushrooms emerge from a log. The stone walls were thick enough that the rooms stayed cool in summer and warm in winter, and the hallways were narrow and curved, following the shape of the hill rather than fighting it, the way wise things follow the shape of what is already there. Moss grew in the cracks between the stones. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood, and the particular sweetness of incense that has been burned in the same room for 100 years. Not the sharp sweetness of fresh incense, but the deep settled sweetness of smoke that has soaked into stone and become part of it. In this monastery, there was a monk whose only job was to carry water. Every morning before the sun was fully up, he walked down the hill to the spring at the bottom, a spring that came out of the rock, with a sound like quiet laughter, as if the mountain found it amusing that someone came every day to take what it had been giving away for thousands of years. He filled 2 wooden buckets, hung them from a pole across his shoulders, and walked back up. The path was steep and uneven. The buckets were heavy. The water sloshed with each step, and by the time he reached the top, his robes were always wet from the splashing, and the path behind him was marked with dark spots where the water had fallen, a trail of small circles that dried in the sun and disappeared as if they had never been. He had been doing this for 40 years. Every morning rain, sun, snow, wind, 40 years of walking down and walking up, 40 years of the same path, the same spring, the same buckets, the same pole that had worn a smooth groove into each of his shoulders, one on the left and one on the right, like the channels water wears into rock. The young monks pitied him. They assumed he had been given this task as punishment, or because he was not clever enough for study, or because he had done something wrong long ago that no one remembered, but no one had bothered to forgive. They offered to take turns carrying the water. He always refused, not rudely, with a small shake of his head and a smile that suggested he knew something they did not, and that the something was too simple to explain. One morning, a visiting teacher, a man known for his sharp mind, his difficult questions, his ability to cut through pretense and tradition, and comfortable self-deception, the way a blade cuts through silk, watched the old monk carry the water up the hill. The teacher stood at the top and watched the whole ascent. He watched the monk's feet find each stone. He watched the water sway in the buckets. He watched the monk's face, not straining, not suffering, not enduring, just walking the way feet walk, the way water sways, the way a man who has done something 40,000 times does it without doing it, the way breathing is done without doing. When the monk reached the top, the teacher approached him. In 40 years of carrying water, the teacher said, "What have you learned?" The old monk set the buckets down carefully, not roughly, not with the relief of someone setting down a burden, but carefully, the way you set down something you have been holding gently. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. He looked at the teacher with eyes that were neither deep nor shallow, neither wise nor simple, simply clear, the way a pond is clear when nothing has disturbed it recently, when the silt has settled and the water is so transparent, you forget the water is there and think you are looking at air. "I have learned," he said, "that the water is always arriving." The teacher waited for more. There was no more. The water is always arriving, not arrived, arriving. The present moment is not a destination you reach. It is not a place you get to after a long journey of self-improvement and meditation and reading the right books and attending the right retreats. It is a place you are always reaching, always arriving at. The way the water in the buckets is always arriving at the top of the hill. Not there yet, not done yet, still sloshing, still moving, still in the process of becoming what it will be when it gets where it is going. And the arriving and the being there are the same thing. The way a river is always going to the sea, and always already at the sea, and always the sea itself. The journey and the destination are not two things. They are one thing, seen from two angles. The way a mountain looks different from the east and the west, but is always the same mountain. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet." He did not say run. He did not say march. He did not say walk efficiently, or walk with purpose, or walk towards something. He said kiss, the lightest, most present, most tender contact between yourself and the ground beneath you. A kiss is not a means of transportation. A kiss is not trying to get somewhere. A kiss is complete in itself. It is its own destination. And your feet right now, wherever they are, tucked under a blanket, resting on a mattress, pressed against the footboard of a bed, your feet are kissing the surface they are touching. They have been kissing it all along. They do not need your permission. They do not need your awareness. But your awareness, if you offer it, makes the kiss real, makes it felt, makes the contact between you and the world something more than physics, something more than weight and surface and the ordinary mechanics of a body at rest. Tonight you do not need to find stillness. You do not need to go anywhere or do anything or achieve any particular state. The stillness is already here, in the weight of your body against the bed, in the rhythm of your breathing, in the small space between one breath and the next, where nothing is happening and nothing needs to happen, and the whole world pauses for a fraction of a second and then continues. And in that pause, that tiny, unremarkable pause that happens 15 times a minute, 900 times an hour, in that pause everything is still, everything is complete, everything has arrived. You have been still this whole time. Your body knows. Your feet know your hands. Wherever they are resting, know it is only the mind that keeps insisting there is somewhere else to be, something else to chase, some other moment that is better than this one. And even the mind, if you listen carefully, is beginning to slow, not because you told it to, not because you forced it, not because you won some battle against your own thoughts. Because the hour is late, because the stories are soft, because the rhythm of these words is doing what the rhythm of the loom did for the charcoal maker, working on something beneath the mind, something older than thought, something that remembers how to rest, and perhaps that is enough for now. Let us pause here and let the stillness do what stillness does, not fill the silence, but make room for it, not push the thoughts away, but let them settle, the way silt settles in a pond when you stop stirring. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quieter teaching still ahead, one about a kind of freedom that has nothing to do with getting more, and everything to do with discovering you already have enough. It begins with a woman and a garden that grew more than she planted, and a tea seller with a squeaking cart who knew only 3 things, but knew them completely. In a city that had grown so quickly that the old streets no longer matched the new maps, where buildings appeared overnight like mushrooms, and the skyline changed so often that people who had lived there, their whole lives sometimes got lost on the way to the bakery. There lived a woman who kept a garden behind her apartment building. It was not much, a narrow strip of earth between the back wall and the alley, no wider than a doorway, no longer than a bus. The soil was poor, thin and pale, full of small stones and bits of old concrete from whatever had stood there before the building went up. The light was limited to 2 hours in the afternoon, when the sun found the gap between the rooftops and sent a narrow blade of gold down into the alley before the shadow of the next building swallowed it again. The neighbors dropped cigarette butts from their balconies. In winter, the runoff from the gutters turned the whole patch into mud that smelled of rust and wet cement. But she grew things, herbs mostly, mint that spread faster than she could cut it back, sending runners under the fence and into the alley, colonizing cracks in the pavement with the cheerful aggression of something that has never been told. It does not belong. Basil that smelled so strong you could catch it from the 3rd floor if the window was open. A warm, peppery sweetness that mixed with the exhaust from the street and somehow won, the way small stubborn things sometimes win against large indifferent ones. A single tomato plant that produced 5 or 6 tomatoes each summer, small, misshapen, not the kind you would see in a market, split at the tops and uneven in color, but so sweet that eating one felt like being forgiven for something you did not know you had done. She had not always been a gardener. She had been for most of her life a person who wanted more. More space, a better apartment, a different job, not a specific different job, just a different one. The way people who are restless want not a particular elsewhere, but the idea of elsewhere itself. A different city, a different version of herself. She had spent her 20s moving from town to town, from plan to plan, from the person she was to the person she thought she should become, always believing that the right life was somewhere else and that she would recognize it when she arrived, the way you recognize your luggage on a carousel. She had not recognized it. She had arrived in many places, and in each one, after the newness faded, after the streets became familiar, and the coffee shops lost their charm, and the apartment that had seemed perfect revealed its cracks and its drafts and its view of a brick wall, the old feeling returned. The sense that something was missing, that the cup was almost full, but not quite, that if she could just add one more thing, one more change, one more move, one more beginning, it would finally be enough. She was 43 when she stopped. Not dramatically, not because of a revelation or a crisis or a book that changed her life. She stopped the way a spinning top stops, slowly, wobbling, losing momentum in small increments, without a clear moment when the motion ended and the stillness began. She was standing in the alley behind her building on a Tuesday afternoon in March, taking out the recycling, and she noticed the strip of earth. She had walked past it 1,000 times. She had never looked at it, and she thought, plainly, without drama, the way you think I should buy milk, or I need to call my sister, she thought. I could grow something here. And that thought, plain and small and ordinary as a seed, was the first thought she had had in years that did not contain the word more. The Buddha spoke often about the middle way. It was, in a sense, the discovery that made him the Buddha, the realization that came after years of searching in the wrong places, the way all important realizations come after years of searching in the wrong places, because the wrong places are where you learn what the right place is not. Before he was the Buddha, he was a prince who had everything: walls of jade, robes of silk gardens, where the fruit fell into your hand if you simply held it out. And then he was an ascetic who had nothing, sitting under trees, eating a single grain of rice, starving his body until his ribs showed through his skin like the hull of a boat through thin water. And in neither place, neither in the palace of too much nor in the forest of too little, did he find what he was looking for. What he found in the end was the middle, not a compromise, not a lukewarm version of either extreme. A different thing entirely, the way a river is not a compromise between the two banks, but something alive that runs between them, touching both, belonging to neither. The middle way is easy to misunderstand. It sounds like moderation. Eat your vegetables. Get 8 hours of sleep. Do not spend too much or save too much. Be reasonable. It sounds like the advice a sensible uncle would give you at a family dinner, the kind of advice that is technically correct and emotionally useless. But that is not what the Buddha meant. He meant something more radical, something that sounds simple until you try to live it and discover it is the hardest thing in the world. He meant that the wanting itself, the engine that drives the search for more, the voice that whispers, "This is not enough. You are not enough. Somewhere else is better." That engine is the thing that prevents you from seeing what is already here. Not that wanting is evil. Not that desire is a sin to be punished. Just that the mind so fixed on what it does not have cannot perceive what it does. The way you cannot see the stars when the lights are on. The stars are still there. You are just looking too hard at something brighter. Tonight, if you are lying here with a quiet list running in the back of your mind, things to do tomorrow, things to fix, things to buy, things to become, you are not wrong for having that list. The list is human. The list is your mind doing its job, trying to take care of you, trying to build a life that will finally feel complete. But consider this: the bed you are lying in is holding you. The air you are breathing is enough air. The body that carried you through this entire day. Every step, every errand, every small decision, every avoided collision is still here, still working, still breathing, without being asked. What if this, exactly this, nothing added, nothing subtracted, nothing improved, is the enough you have been looking for? Not forever, not as a philosophy. Just for tonight. Just for the next few minutes. Just long enough to let the body rest while the mind catches up. In a village so small that it did not appear on any official map, so small that the postman delivered mail by name rather than address, because everyone knew which house belonged to whom, there lived a tea seller who operated from a wooden cart. The cart had 2 wheels that squeaked, a canvas awning that leaked when it rained and sagged when it did not, and a small charcoal stove where he heated water in a kettle so old that the bottom was black with decades of soot, and the handle was wrapped in layers of cloth because the metal burned through every wrapping within a month. He sold 3 kinds of tea, just 3, green jasmine and a dark oolong that he bought from a farmer in the hills, who dried the leaves on bamboo racks in the open air and delivered them once a month in paper bags that were always slightly damp and smelled of mountain fog. People sometimes asked him why he did not sell more varieties. The market 2 streets over had stalls with 20, 30 kinds of tea, tea from 6 countries, tea in silk bags and wooden boxes and glass jars with handwritten labels, tea with flowers pressed into the leaves, and tea with gold flakes floating on the surface, and tea that cost more per gram than silver. His cart, with its 3 teas, and its squeaking wheels, and its leaking awning, looked shabby beside them. It looked like something from a different century. It looked like someone who had not gotten the message. He never seemed bothered by the question. He would pour whatever tea the person had ordered, slowly, holding the kettle high, so the water fell in a thin stream that cooled as it dropped, catching the light for a moment before disappearing into the cup. And he would say, I know these 3 teas. I know them the way I know my own hands. I know what temperature makes the green bitter. 4 degrees too hot, and the whole cup is ruined. I know how long to steep the jasmine, 11 seconds shorter than you think, because the flowers keep releasing even after you pour. I know that the oolong is best in the evening, when the mind is tired, and the green is best in the morning, when the body is slow, and the jasmine is best in the afternoon, when both are somewhere in between. He would set the cup down in front of the person with both hands, the way you hand someone a gift. If I sold 30 teas, I would know none of them. I would just be a man standing behind a cart, guessing. There was a regular customer, a merchant who traveled frequently, who had tasted tea in porcelain cups in hotel lobbies, and in ceramic bowls at ceremonies, and in paper cups on trains crossing borders, who came to the cart every evening and ordered the oolong and sat on the upturned wooden crate the tea seller kept for customers and drank in silence. One evening the merchant set down his cup and said, I have been everywhere. I have tasted everything, and this is still the best tea I have ever had. The tea seller smiled. Not proudly, not modestly, just smiled, the way someone smiles when they hear something true that they already knew. It is not the best tea, he said. It is the tea that knows you are here. The merchant looked at him, waiting. Expensive tea does not know who is drinking it. The tea seller said, it tastes the same, whether you are paying attention or not, whether you are there or somewhere else, whether you are tasting it or just swallowing it. But this tea, because I make it slowly, because I watch the water, because I pour it for you and not for anyone else, because I know that tonight you look more tired than last night, and so I steeped it 10 seconds longer. This tea arrives, and you arrive to meet it. And the meeting is what you are tasting, not the leaf, not the water. The meeting the merchant drank. The tea was warm and dark and slightly smoky, the way the end of a long day is slightly smoky, not unpleasant, not bitter, just honest, the taste of something that has been through heat and come out the other side, changed but not destroyed. It tasted like enough. Shunryu Suzuki once said, if your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. And perhaps the same is true of having. In the mind that has little, each thing is vivid, specific, tasted, fully held with attention. In the mind that has everything, nothing stands out. Nothing arrives. Nothing meets you. The cup is always full, and a cup that is always full cannot receive. A bird builds its nest from whatever is nearby. A piece of string, a dry leaf, a thread pulled from someone's laundry, hanging on a line. It does not fly to another country for better materials. It does not compare its nest to the nest in the next tree. It does not scroll through images of nests built by birds with more resources in more favorable climates and feel that its own nest is inadequate. It builds with what is here, and when it is done, the nest holds. It holds eggs, it holds rain. It holds the weight of a bird settling in for the night. Not because the materials are exceptional, because the builder did not waste its energy wishing for different ones. You have built today from whatever was nearby. Some of it was good material, strong thread, solid wood, the kind of moments that hold weight. Some of it was string and dry leaves and improvisation, and the kind of making do that no one will ever admire, but that gets the job done. And you built anyway. And the day held, it carried you all the way to this moment, this bed, this breath, this voice in the dark, and it did not collapse. Tomorrow you will build again, with whatever tomorrow provides. But tonight the building is done. You can set down the tools. You can stop measuring. You can look at what you built today, not with the eye of a critic, but with the eye of a bird returning to its nest, and see that it holds. Pema Chödrön once observed, "Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know." And perhaps what the wanting has been trying to teach you all along is not how to get more, but how to notice what is already in your hands. The garden behind the apartment building, the 3 teas on the squeaking cart, the 5 misshapen tomatoes, the bed you are lying in, the air you are breathing, the night that is holding you the way the earth holds a seed, not tightly, not loosely, but exactly enough. Let us rest here. The night is deeper now. The air is quieter, and the next part of this journey is softer still. A meditation on change, on the things that pass through our lives. Like weather, leaving us different, but not diminished. It begins with a bridge, a river, and the man who spent his life trying to keep one from leaving the other. When you are ready, we will continue together. There was a man who built a bridge, not a large bridge, just wide enough for a single cart, just long enough to cross the river, where it narrowed between 2 shoulders of grey rock that leaned toward each other like old friends, sharing a secret. He built it from stone, because his father had built from stone, and his father before him, and because stone, he believed, was the one material that did not betray you. Wood rotted, iron rusted, rope frayed and snapped without warning, like a promise that seemed solid until the weight came. But stone endured. Stone was the thing you could leave behind and find unchanged when you returned. Stone was the closest a man could come to building something permanent in a world that was not. He spent 3 years on it. He cut the stones himself from a quarry, half a day's walk uphill, shaping them with a chisel and a mallet, learning the grain of each one, because stones have grain, the way wood has grain, and if you cut against it, the stone splits, where you do not want it to split, and the whole piece is ruined. He carried them down on a sled he had made from oak planks, 1 stone at a time, and fitted them together without mortar, just weight and angle, and the patience of a man who believed that if you got the shape exactly right, gravity would do the rest. And he was right. The stones held. The bridge stood. The river ran beneath it, dark and cold and indifferent, and the carts crossed over it, and the man would walk out some evenings just to stand in the middle and feel the solidity of it under his feet. The way it did not sway, did not creak, did not give, but the river was changing. It had been changing since long before the bridge, since long before the man, since long before anyone in the village could remember, or anyone's grandfather could remember. Each spring, the snowmelt came down from the mountains and pushed the water a little farther east. Each autumn the current carved a little deeper into the western bank, stealing soil a handful at a time. The way time steals. So slowly it looks like nothing is happening, until one day you notice that the bank is 3 feet farther from where it used to be, and you cannot say when it moved. After 10 years, the river had shifted far enough that the western end of the bridge no longer reached the bank. There was a gap, just a foot at first, then 2, then wide enough that the carts could not cross without planks laid over the empty space. And the planks wobbled, and the drivers cursed, and the man felt each curse like a crack in something he had built to be unbreakable. He repaired, he extended. He added stones to the western end, reaching toward the new bank, the way a hand reaches for something that is pulling away. And the river moved again. And he extended again. And the river moved again. He was not a fool. He knew the river was winning. He had always known, somewhere beneath the certainty, in the place where knowing lives before you are willing to admit it. But he could not stop building. The bridge was his answer to a question the world kept asking. Can anything last? And he needed the answer to be yes, the way a drowning man needs air. Not because air is complicated, but because without it there is nothing. The Buddha once said, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your own salvation with diligence. This is sometimes quoted with gravity, as though it were a warning carved in stone. But listen to it again, slowly the way you listen to rain. All conditioned things are impermanent. Not some things. Not the fragile ones. Not the ones you did not build well enough, or love hard enough, or hold tightly enough. All of them. The bridge, and the river, and the man, and the mountain the stones came from, and the chisel he cut them with, and the hands that held the chisel. The teaching is not a warning. It is a weather report. It is the Buddha pointing at the sky and saying, look, it changes color. And you looking up and seeing that it does, and that it always has, and that the changing is not a flaw in the sky, but the whole point of it. There is a thread in this teaching that is easy to miss, because it runs counter to everything the grieving mind wants to hear. Impermanence is not only loss, it is also arrival. The same force that takes the blossom from the branch is the force that brought the blossom to the branch in the first place. The same river that moved away from the bridge also carved the valley that the village sits in, carved the soil where the wheat grows, carved the path where the children walk to school, carved the shape of the life that the man loved enough to build a bridge for. Without change there would be no spring. Without loss there would be no room for what comes next. The door that closes behind you is the same door that opened to let you through. His daughter was the one who changed things. She was 12, old enough to see clearly, young enough to say what she saw without apology. She found him one evening, sitting on the bridge with his feet hanging over the edge, where the gap had grown too wide to plank, staring at the water the way you stare at something you love that is leaving you, not angrily, not desperately, but with the exhausted tenderness of someone who has been fighting a long time and is beginning to wonder what they are fighting for. Why do you not build a new bridge, she said, where the river is now? Because this is where the bridge belongs. She sat down next to him. Her feet did not reach the water. She swung them in the air, back and forth, the way children swing their feet when they are thinking, or when they are not thinking, which for children is often the same thing. But the river is not here anymore. She said. He did not answer. The evening light made the water below look like copper, warm and bright and moving, always moving. Papa, she said. The river did not leave you. The river went somewhere new and is inviting you to follow. He looked at her. She was swinging her legs. She was not trying to be wise. She was 12. She was stating the obvious, which is the hardest thing in the world to state, because the obvious is the thing we spend the most energy not seeing. Something cracked. Not his heart. Something harder than his heart. His certainty. The certainty that the bridge he built was the bridge that mattered. That the spot he chose was the right spot. That permanence was something a man could build if he was stubborn enough and careful enough and willing to carry stones uphill for the rest of his life. He built a new bridge the following spring. It took him only 4 months this time, partly because he was more experienced, partly because the new spot was easier, but mostly because he was not building for forever. He was building for now, and the stones fit together more easily, somehow, when he stopped asking them to last, when he stopped loading each one with the impossible weight of permanence, and let it be what it was, a stone in a bridge over a river. For as long as the river stayed, Dogen wrote, time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away. This is a strange sentence. It seems to say that time does not pass, but what Dogen meant, perhaps, is that you are not watching time from the outside. You are not standing on the bank while the river flows past. You are the river. You are the thing that is moving, and when you stop resisting the movement, when you stop building bridges to hold yourself in one place, you discover that the movement itself is where you live. It has always been where you live. There was a garden, not the kind someone plants, but the kind that appears on its own, in an abandoned lot between 2 buildings. Nobody knew when the first seed arrived. Perhaps the wind carried it from a park across the city. Perhaps a bird dropped it while resting on a ledge. Perhaps it had been in the soil all along, buried under the concrete, waiting with the blind patience of seeds for someone to break the surface and let the light in. The lot had been a warehouse once, then nothing then. A place where people left things they no longer wanted, mattresses and tires, and a chair with no seat. Then the city tore down the remaining walls, and the concrete floor cracked over one bitter winter. And in the spring, green came through. Not tentatively, not politely, the way green always comes. With the unstoppable confidence of something that does not know it is not supposed to be there. Within 3 years, the lot was full. Wildflowers that had no business growing in a city, grasses tall enough to hide in, a vine that climbed the wall of the neighboring building and reached the 3rd floor window, where an old woman started leaving the window open so she could smell it in the evenings. Nobody planted any of it. Nobody watered it. Nobody decided what should grow where. The garden made its own decisions, and they were better than any gardener's decisions, because the garden was not trying to be beautiful. It was just trying to be alive. And alive, it turns out, is always beautiful. The lot will not last. The city will build something there, eventually. Another building, another parking structure, another layer of concrete over the soil that waited so long for light, and the wildflowers will disappear, and the vine will be cut, and the old woman will close her window. But for now, for this brief, unrepeatable season, the garden is here. And it is not mourning its future absence. It is not grieving the concrete that is coming. It is blooming, because blooming is what it does. Because this moment is the only moment it has. And this moment, for a wildflower, in an abandoned lot in the middle of a city that does not know it exists, is enough. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "It is not impermanence that makes us suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not." Notice the precision. He did not say change is painless. He did not say loss does not hurt. He said the pain is not in the change. The pain is in the argument with the change. The inner voice that says, this should have lasted. This should have stayed. This was supposed to be the bridge that held. And the bridge did hold. It held for 10 years. And then the river invited it to move. And the invitation is not a betrayal. It is just the river, doing what rivers do. Tonight, you do not need to stop the river. You do not need to agree with impermanence, or accept it, or make peace with it. That is too much to ask of someone who is trying to sleep. All you need to know is that right now, in this moment, everything is still here. Your breath is here. Your warmth is here. The sound of these words is here. And this moment, this one, not the one before it, and not the one after, is the only one that is asking anything of you. And all it is asking is that you be in it. Not forever, just now. Just this breath. Just this heartbeat. Just this quiet, fleeting, unrepeatable moment that will never come again and does not need to, because it is here now. And now is the only place anything has ever happened. Let us rest here. The night has grown quieter. The stories are gentler now. Let the body be heavy. Let the breath be slow. There is one more teaching ahead before we begin to close, and it is perhaps the kindest one of all. A permission you have been waiting for longer than you know. When you are ready, we will continue together. What follows is not a lesson, but a permission. The permission to stop being hard on yourself, to stop grading the day, to stop measuring who you were against, who you think you should have been. It begins with a very tired monk and a cup of tea he almost did not drink. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with the body. You know it. It is the tiredness that comes from being watched, not by anyone else, but by yourself. The voice inside that reviews every conversation, every decision, every small misstep, and says you could have done better. You should have known. Why did you say that? Why did you not say the other thing? It is the voice that grades the day before the day is even over. And the grade is never quite high enough. And the report card is never signed with kindness. This voice is not your enemy. It is not a flaw in your design. It is a guard dog that was trained too well, trained to bark at everything, trained to treat every shadow as a threat, trained to never rest because resting might mean something gets through. And it is exhausted. Not just you, the voice itself is exhausted. It has been working all day, all week, all year, keeping watch over a life that does not need as much watching as it thinks. But no one ever told the guard dog it could sleep. No one ever scratched it behind the ears and said, "You did enough, lie down." The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This is a sentence that is easy to read and almost impossible to believe, not because it is wrong, because the guard dog hears it and barks. Of course I deserve love, but first let me fix this. First let me earn it. First, let me become the version of myself that is worthy of it. And so the love gets postponed, and postponed and postponed, until one night you are lying in the dark, tired from a long day of not being good enough, and you realize that you have been waiting for a permission that was already given, that was always given, that did not need to be earned, because it was never withheld. A monk, not a young one, not an old one, somewhere in the middle years when the body has started to slow, but the mind has not yet agreed to slow with it, sat in a kitchen long after the other monks had gone to sleep. The monastery was quiet. Not the anxious quiet of a room where someone is trying not to make noise. The deep quiet, the kind that is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something patient, something that has been waiting for the noise to stop so it could finally be heard. He was not meditating. He was sitting at a wooden table with his head in his hands, and he was tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. He had made a mistake that day. Not a large mistake. He had spoken sharply to a young student who had asked a question during meditation. A simple question, an honest question, the kind of question that deserves a gentle answer. And he had not given a gentle answer. He had given a sharp one, and the student's face had changed. Just for a moment, the way a candle flame changes when you breathe too close to it. A flicker, a flinch, and then the careful rearrangement of someone pretending they were not hurt. He had apologized. The student had said it was fine. But it was not fine. He knew it was not fine because he could still see the flicker. Hours later, in the dark kitchen, he could still see it, projected on the inside of his eyelids, like a photograph he could not put down. And he was doing what he always did, replaying, revising, prosecuting. The trial was efficient. The verdict was always the same. You are a monk, you are supposed to be kind. You failed again. The kettle on the stove still had water in it from the evening meal. He did not know why he heated it. He was not thirsty. Perhaps his hands needed something to do. Perhaps the act of making tea was the only kindness he could think of, and he needed to aim it somewhere, even if the only person in the room was himself. Especially if the only person in the room was himself. While the water heated, he listened to the low hum of the stove. The first small clicks as the metal expanded, the rising whisper that comes before the boil. A sound so gradual that you cannot identify the moment it begins. Only the moment you notice it has been happening for a while. There was something in the sound that reminded him of breathing. Not his breathing. The building's breathing. The old walls settling. The stones adjusting to the shift in temperature. The way bones adjust when you change position in your sleep. Without thought, without effort, without anyone deciding it should happen. The water boiled. He poured it over the leaves and watched the color bloom. Pale at first, then gold. Then a deep amber that looked like candlelight trapped in liquid. He wrapped his hands around the cup. The warmth moved into his fingers, his palms, his wrists, traveling up his arms the way good news travels through a house, room by room, quietly until everything is warm, and without deciding to, without planning it, without framing it as a practice or a technique or a step on a spiritual path. He said something to himself that he had never said before. You are allowed to be imperfect. He said it quietly, not as a teaching, not as an affirmation, as a fact, the way you might say the water is warm or the kitchen is dark, a statement so obvious it should not need to be spoken, and yet so rarely spoken that hearing it, even from his own mouth, even in a whisper, felt like the first time anyone had ever said it. To anyone anywhere, the cup was warm. The kitchen was quiet. The student was sleeping in his room and would wake tomorrow, and the world would go on. And the monk, the imperfect, sharp-tongued, tired monk, who had spent his life trying to be better than he was, drank his tea, and for the first time in a very long while, he did not add the thought that he did not deserve it. Pema Chödrön once wrote, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It is a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness, well, can we be present with the darkness of others." She did not say, fix your darkness. She did not say, overcome it, or transcend it, or meditate it away. She said, know it. Be present with it. Sit in the kitchen with it at midnight and make it a cup of tea and drink the tea without apologizing for being thirsty. There was a woman who washed clothes for a living. She worked at a river, kneeling on flat stones at the water's edge, scrubbing fabric against rock, wringing it with hands so strong that the veins stood out like roots of a tree that has been gripping the same soil for decades. The water was cold in the mornings, cold enough to make your knuckles ache. cold enough that the first plunge of the hands was a small act of courage that no one would ever recognize or praise. She started every day by pushing her hands in and holding them there until the aching stopped, not because it went away, but because her hands got used to it, the way you get used to anything if you stay with it long enough. She washed other people's clothes. She knew their stains the way a doctor knows symptoms, reading them, interpreting them, understanding the life behind the mark. She knew which family's children played in the red mud by the schoolyard. She knew which husband spilled wine at dinner. She knew the particular gray that white shirts turn when someone has been sick for a long time and the washing has been done in a hurry, without care, because there was no care left to give. She read lives in fabric the way some people read palms, not with magic, but with attention. Her own clothes she washed last, always last. At the end of the day, when the light was going and the water was warmer from the afternoon sun, she would kneel with her own shirt, her own skirt, and wash them quickly, carelessly, the way you clean a house you do not expect guests in. She gave the best water to strangers. She gave the best light to other people's stains. Her own things were always a little less bright, a little less cared for, a little more grey. One evening her daughter, a girl of 14, with the sharp, unforgiving eyes of someone who has not yet learned to look away from uncomfortable truths, sat beside her at the river. Why do you wash your own clothes last? Because they can wait, but they are always the dirtiest. The woman laughed. They are not the dirtiest. They are just the ones I notice least. The daughter picked up her mother's shirt from the pile. She held it up to the fading light. It was grey in the way that happens slowly, over months, over years, so gradually that the person wearing it cannot see it. The way you cannot see your own face aging, because you see it every day. The daughter saw it. "Mama," she said, "if someone brought you this shirt, you would soak it overnight. You would use the good soap. You would lay it on the warm rocks to dry. Why do you not do that for yourself?" The woman looked at the shirt in her daughter's hands, and she saw it, really saw it, for the first time in years, the grey, the thinness at the elbows, where the fabric had worn almost transparent. The small tear at the hem she had been meaning to mend for 6 months. She had been so busy caring for everyone else's fabric that she had forgotten hers was fabric too, that it needed the same water, the same soap, the same warm rocks, the same attention she gave so freely to strangers. She took the shirt from her daughter's hands and walked back to the river and knelt down and washed it the way she would have washed it for anyone else, slowly with the good soap. In the last of the warm light, and something in her chest shifted as she worked, not dramatically, not like a door opening or a weight lifting, but the way furniture shifts when a house settles. A small movement, a rearrangement, the beginning of a new way of sitting inside her own life. An old Zen teaching says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The actions do not change. What changes is the kindness behind them. You chop wood for yourself with the same care you chop it for others. You carry water for yourself without apologizing for being thirsty. You wash your own shirt in the good light, with the good soap, because your shirt is also a shirt. Because you are also a person. Because the compassion that flows so easily outward, toward friends, toward strangers, toward the student whose face flickered, that compassion is allowed to flow inward too. It is not selfish. It is not indulgent. It is the river completing its circuit. It is the water coming home. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, To be beautiful means to be yourself. You do not need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself. He did not say improve yourself. He did not say perfect yourself. He said accept, the way you accept rain, the way you accept the weight of your own body, the way you accept that the night is dark, and the dark is not a punishment, but a place where rest lives. Tonight, lying here, you have permission to stop grading the day. The day is over. It was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. You said some things you wish you had not said, and did not say some things you wish you had. You were patient in some moments, and impatient in others. You were kind, and you were careless, and you were distracted, and you were present, and you were all of these things because you are a human being. And human beings contain everything, all at once, all the time. And that is not a flaw, that is the design. And the guard dog, the voice that has been keeping watch all day, barking at every shadow, growling at every imperfection, you can let it rest now. Not because the perimeter is secure, because the perimeter was never in danger. The only thing out there in the dark is more dark, and the dark is not coming for you. It is just the night, doing what nights do, holding the world gently until the morning comes. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is more than enough. Let the breath come slowly. Let the body remember what the mind keeps forgetting, that you have already arrived, and you are already home. And home does not require perfection. It only requires you. When you are ready, we will continue together. We are coming now to the close of tonight's journey. What remains is a single story, the longest, the slowest, the quietest of all, and then the rest that you have earned. We have come a long way tonight, not in distance, in quiet. We have sat with a man who mended nets and could not mend his sleep, and an old woman whose broom on stone sounded like breathing. We have walked beside a canal with a schoolteacher who carried the day home on her shoulders, and a carpenter who stopped fixing a door that was never broken. We have watched a woman hold an orchid so tightly with her, wanting that she forgot to see what was already growing, and a young fisherman eat bread on a pier, while the sea wore a blue he had never seen before. We have listened to the steady rhythm of a weaver's loom, followed a river that invited a bridge builder to follow, and sat in a dark kitchen with a monk who finally made himself a cup of tea. These are not extraordinary people. They are not saints or masters or anyone whose name you would find in a book. They are the kind of people you pass on the street without noticing, the kind who carry their questions quietly, who make their discoveries alone, in kitchens and greenhouses, and on piers at dawn, and who change not in a flash of light but in the slow, invisible way that stone changes underwater. They are, in other words, very much like you, and the teachings that move through their stories tonight, the restless mind, the letting go, the weight of wanting, the stillness within motion, the middle way of enough, the impermanence of all things, the kindness you owe yourself. They were never instructions. They were never rules to memorize or principles to apply. They were more like windows. Someone opened them, and a breeze came through, and the room felt different afterward. Not fixed, not solved. Just a little more breathable. Just a little more like a room you could sleep in now. There is one more story. It is the last one, and it asks nothing of you, except that you listen the way you would listen to rain on a roof. Not for meaning, not for instruction, just for the sound of something falling softly in the dark. In a town that sat between two mountains, in a valley where the fog gathered every evening, like something coming home, there lived a man who repaired clocks. His shop was small, one room with a counter and a workbench, and a window that faced east, so that the morning light came in and touched the gears and springs and tiny screws the way a careful hand checks on something it loves. The shop smelled of oil and brass, and the dusty sweetness of wood that has been polished many times over many years. The walls were lined with clocks, dozens of them, ticking in their separate rhythms, none quite synchronized, all slightly different, and the combined sound was not orderly or precise, but something messier and more beautiful, like a room full of people breathing at their own pace. He had been repairing clocks since he was 14, when his uncle placed a broken pocket watch in his palm and said, "Open it." He opened it, and inside was a world so small and so precise that it took his breath away. Tiny wheels interlocking with tinier wheels. Springs no thicker than an eyelash. A balance that swung back and forth, measuring something invisible, with a patience that nothing human could match. He had been hooked from that moment, not by the mechanics, though the mechanics were beautiful, but by the silence inside the mechanism. When he opened a clock and leaned close, the world outside disappeared. There was only the clock and the problem and the small, specific attention required to find what was wrong and set it right. It was the closest thing to meditation he had ever experienced, not because he was thinking about nothing, because he was thinking about one thing, and the one thing was enough. He was old now. His eyes were not what they had been. His hands shook slightly in the mornings, a tremor that steadied as the day went on, as if his body needed a few hours to remember what it was for. His daughter visited on Sundays, driving 3 hours from the city where she worked in an office, where time was measured in deadlines and the relentless scroll of email. She loved him. She worried about him, alone in the shop, eating simple meals, talking to clocks, sleeping in the small apartment above the workbench, where the ticking came up through the floorboards like a pulse. One Sunday she found him sitting in his chair with a clock open on the bench in front of him. He was not working on it. He was just looking at it. His magnifying glasses were pushed up on his forehead. His hands were resting on his knees. He looked like someone who had just heard a piece of music end and was still sitting in the silence that followed. "Papa," she said, "are you all right?" He looked up. "I was thinking," he said, "about what a clock actually does." She sat down across from him. "It tells time." "No," he said gently, the way he always corrected her, not to show that he was right, but to show that there was more. "A clock does not tell time. Time does not need telling. Time is already happening. A clock just reminds you to notice." She looked at the open clock on the bench. The balance wheel was still, frozen mid-swing. "I have spent my whole life," he said, "fixing these machines so they could remind people what time it is. And do you know what I have learned?" She waited. People do not want to know what time it is. They want to know that time is still moving. They want proof that the next moment is coming. That is what the ticking is. Not a measurement. A promise. Tick, you are still here. Tick, you are still here. Tick, you are still here. He reached out and touched the balance wheel with the tip of his finger, the lightest touch, barely a whisper of contact, and it began to swing. Back and forth, back and forth. The clock did not start, but the balance wheel swung freely, measuring nothing, promising nothing, just moving, because a finger had asked it to. "That is all any of us are doing," he said, swinging back and forth, between yesterday and tomorrow, between wanting and having, between holding on and letting go. And the swinging is not the problem. The swinging is the life. She reached across the bench and took his hand. It was warm and rough, and it trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the effort of keeping going, the way a clock trembles when it is running. "Papa," she said, "you should rest." He smiled. "I am resting," he said. "I have been resting all day." This is what rest looks like when you stop expecting it to look like something else. They sat together as the afternoon light moved across the bench, illuminating the gears and springs one by one, as though the sun were taking inventory. The clocks ticked. The fog began to gather in the valley outside, and the old man held his daughter's hand and did not think about time, because time for once was not asking to be thought about. It was just there, moving through the room the way light moves through glass, without effort, without sound, without needing anyone's permission. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Perhaps you notice that your shoulders have already begun to drop, not because you told them to, because they have been listening to these stories too, and they have quietly decided on their own that it is safe to let go. The jaw may have softened, that place where you hold the things you did not say today, the words you swallowed, the arguments you chose not to have. It softens now, not because the arguments are resolved, but because the hour for arguments has passed and the hour for rest has come. Your hands, wherever they are resting, on your chest, beside you, tucked beneath a pillow, feel heavier than they did when we began. This heaviness is not fatigue. It is permission. It is your body saying, finally, what it has been wanting to say all day. I am done carrying. I am done reaching. I am done holding. Let me be held instead. And whatever is beneath you, the mattress, the blanket, the floor of a room somewhere in the world, where it is late and dark and quiet, it is holding you. It has been holding you this whole time, and it will go on holding you through the night, without asking anything in return. The breath comes slower now. You do not need to guide it. You do not need to count it. It has its own rhythm, its own ancient knowledge of how to keep you alive while you are not paying attention. It has been doing this since the moment you were born, this quiet, faithful in and out, and it has never once forgotten. Tonight you can trust it the way you trust the ground, the way you trust the dark, the way you trust that morning will come, not because you set an alarm, but because mornings always come. The stories you heard tonight are still here. They are settling into you the way snow settles onto a field, quietly, without weight, covering everything, in a thin layer of white that will melt by morning. You do not need to remember them. You do not need to hold on to any of them. They were never yours to keep. They were borrowed for an evening, the way you borrow a blanket on a cold night, and when you wake, they will have done their quiet work, not by teaching you anything, but by keeping you company while you drifted. The clocks tick in the old man's shop. The weaver's loom is still. The tea seller has folded his canvas awning and wheeled his cart home through streets that smell of rain and charcoal. The woman who grew orchids has turned off the light in her greenhouse, and the orchid that will not bloom is standing in the dark, growing in its own time, at its own pace, needing nothing. The net mender sleeps beside the sea. The baker sleeps above her kitchen, where the warmth of the ovens rises through the floorboards and finds her like a hand placed gently on a forehead. The monk sleeps in his narrow bed, and the cup he drank from sits washed and upside down on the counter, and the kitchen is quiet, and the monastery is quiet, And the world outside is quiet in the way that the world is always quiet when you stop listening for noise. And you are here, still breathing, still held by whatever is holding you. The fog has come down into the valley. The river has gone, wherever rivers go at night. The clocks are keeping time for no one, and the night, the long, kind, unhurried night, has wrapped itself around you, the way a story wraps itself around a truth, not to trap it, but to keep it warm until someone is ready to hear it. You are ready. You have been ready for a long time, and now there is nothing left to do but close your eyes and let the quiet take you where it has been waiting to take you all along. Not to a new place, but to the oldest place. The place you have always known, the place where the mind finally stops swinging and the balance wheel rests, and the only sound is the sound of someone breathing in the dark, slowly, softly, already almost asleep.